I'm VJ Hamilton and welcome to the Autoimmune Reset, the place for you to learn how to thrive with autoimmune disease and feel empowered to take steps to transform your health to feel better than ever. You can start making changes today to improve your health. So with every episode, my mission is to share with you simple ways to up-level your diet and lifestyle with key learnings from my own journey reversing autoimmune disease and inspirational stories from those who have reset their autoimmune symptoms and are now thriving in life. I suffered from autoimmune disease for over 25 years and now I live symptom-free, and I wish the same for you as well. So thank you for being here and sharing this time with me. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Autoimmune Reset podcast. I'm your host, VJ Hamilton. I'm a nutritionist, scientist, and expert in autoimmune disease. And today I want to talk to you about something that I get asked all the time. And it's usually asked in quite a hopeful but often frustrated way. And that is, can I speed up my hair growth? And I completely understand why this comes up, because when you're dealing with hair loss, whether that's alopecia, shedding, thinning, it's this very natural urge to want to fix it quickly. You want to do something, you want to move things along, you just want to get back to normal. And I know I have been in that position many times where I would discover a new patch and I knew that it was going to take some time for it to grow back, and that might have affected how I wore my hair, which doesn't sound like a big issue, but it was for me at the time. But also the worry about how long would it take to grow back? Is this just one patch or am I going to get another patch? What caused it? And you just want it to grow back as soon as possible, because that gives you that positive signs that things are going in the right direction. But what I want to talk about today is whether that's actually the right way to think about it, because in most cases, especially with alopecia, it's not about forcing the body to grow hair faster. It's about understanding what's getting in the way and then supporting the body so it can do what it's designed to do. And when I finally had sustained hair growth and I didn't go through that hair loss cycle anymore, which was over 10 years ago now, it was when I started working on the different systems and different elements in my body. And that paid off in the long run. And that was because I had chronic fatigue syndrome at the time and I really needed to get my energy sorted out. I couldn't really function anymore. And that is part of this as well, because there are some key areas that you really need to look into when you are experiencing hair growth. And we're going to be talking about those today when it comes to whether you can speed up hair growth. Before we get into the science, I just want to say this. Hair loss is not just about hair. It can affect how you feel in yourself. It can affect your confidence, your identity, your sense of control. And if you're somebody like me who likes to control every aspect of their life, I try to let go as much as I can, but it's just how I'm made, I think. It's extremely difficult. I know when I look back at some of the decisions I made about my life, to be honest, everything's worked out the way it should have worked out. But at the same time, I look back and I know I made certain decisions because I didn't feel confident. There were certain holidays that I decided not to go on because I was too worried about my hair or different activities that I could have been involved in, but it just felt like it was always a bit of a blocker. And, I see this in clinic every day as well. So when somebody asks, how do I speed up my hair growth? What they're really asking is, how do I get to feel like myself again? And that's important because it explains the urgency that you might be feeling or a loved one might be feeling. And I know I was feeling that way. I used to just say to myself, patience is a virtue. I know my nana used to say it. And in any situation now, whether good or bad, whether the end result is going to be really good or whether something has happened to me and I know that it's going to take time to get better, I say that to myself because especially when it comes to hair loss and other health conditions, it can take time to rebuild yourself again. And having a little bit of patience honestly goes a long way. Traditionally, we thought about hair growth quite simply. The hair grows from the root, the cell divides, and then it pushes the hair up and out of the follicle. But actually, newer research is now showing something different, and hair isn't just being pushed, it's actually being pulled upwards by the cells around it. So there's this coordinated movement happening inside the follicle. And the follicle is an organ in and of itself. And just because we have 100,000 of them doesn't mean each one isn't important. Within the follicle, there is almost like this tiny motor. And what's interesting is this: when researchers blocked cell division, which we focus on a lot when it comes to hair growth actually still continued. But when they disrupted cell movement, the growth drops significantly. So this tells us something really important, that hair growth is not just about making more cells, it's about how much energy your cells produce, the communication between your cells, and the coordination within the follicle itself. And that changes how we think about what actually helps when it comes to hair growth. Now let's bring this back to alopecia, because this is where things become much clearer. With alopecia areata, the follicle isn't gone, it's still there, but it's been disrupted by the immune system. And what often happens is the hair starts to come back as vellus hairs. So these are those very fine, soft, almost colourless hairs. And this is actually still a really good sign. It means the follicle is active again. But then what I find is people get stuck because it doesn't always progress into that thicker, darker hair, which we call terminal hair. And it's what I look for a lot with my clients. They might get the vellus hair growing, which is, as I said, such a positive sign. But how do we take it to that next step? And what is it telling us if the hair won't grow past that next step? I've heard instances where people have got a full head of hair, of vellus hair, so the follicle is still active and working. I've heard from people who have alopecia universalis, and they tell me that they have fine hairs all over their body. But why is it not transitioning to that terminal hair? And this is the key question. Why does it stop there? So let's come back to this. You've got the vellus hairs coming through, which is a good sign. The follicle is active, but it's not progressing into that thicker terminal hair. So let's talk about what's actually going on. And from what I see in clinic, this is rarely just one thing, unfortunately. It's usually a combination of systems that are still out of balance, which is so vital for hair growth. So let's go through those one by one. The first is ongoing immune activity. With alopecia areata, the immune system is the starting point. That's what is causing the hair loss in the first place. So even when things improve, it doesn't always mean the immune response has fully switched off. What I often see here is this low-level lingering immune activity around the follicle. It's not enough to cause obvious shedding, but it's enough to stop the follicle fully committing to that growth. And when we look at this, the question becomes, why is the immune system still activated? And that's where I start digging. That's where I put my detective hat on and start looking for underlying imbalances, such as whether there's issues in the gut and the barrier function, if there's any microbial imbalance, if there's ongoing triggers like infections or food reactivity. And I might even be looking at environmental load like mold toxicity, chemical toxicity. And there are various tests that I use which can look into all these different areas. And obviously I do a full comprehensive analysis before I will recommend testing to a client. If I am talking to a potential client as part of a call, we'll go through a bit about their history. And it might be at that point I recommend doing a stool test or doing tests to look at underlying nutrient deficiencies or inflammation, because it gives us a little bit more information to start with. Something like environmental load, we might try other things first before exploring that, unless there is obvious mold in their house or obvious chemical exposure. Because if the immune system is still perceiving a threat, even if it's subtle, it's not going to fully restore normal follicle function. So this is less about switching it off and more about removing the reasons why it's switched on in the first place. The second is that the inflammation hasn't yet resolved. And this is slightly different, but obviously closely linked. And a lot of people focus on reducing inflammation. But what I often see is that inflammation has started, but it's not properly resolved. So we have these different cycles when it comes to inflammation. You have the initiation, then you have the activation, and then you have a resolution at the end. So the initiation in a normal process might be your immune system identifying a virus. The activation is it firing up its army and targeting that virus. And then once it has got rid of the virus, then there is a mop-up process and a resolution. But when it comes to an autoimmune disease like alopecia areata, if that final phase doesn't happen properly and your immune system is still activated against your follicle, the system is going to stay slightly on, which creates an environment where the follicle can't fully mature. And this is where I focus quite a lot on resolution pathways when it comes to inflammation, not just calming things down, but helping the body complete the process. And practically, this is where omega-3s and specialized pro-resolving mediators, which are referred to as SPMs, can be really helpful, whether through food or through supplements. And I will often use Body Bio's Resolvin quite a lot here, particularly in alopecia cases where things feel like they've plateaued and there might be this underlying inflammatory picture happening. But again, this only works properly if the underlying drivers are already being addressed. The third is low energy at the cellular level, and this is one that's often missed. And when I think back to my own health and having chronic fatigue syndrome, I'm sure this was a key area that was affecting me when I was trying to get my hair to grow back. And my hair did grow back, but it wasn't sustainable. And if we go back to the idea that hair is being pulled through coordinated cellular movement, this process requires energy. So if you are chronically stressed, you're not sleeping well, you're under eating or under fueling in some way, overtraining, you're depleted in nutrients, then the cells within the follicle simply don't have the capacity to function optimally. And this is where we start thinking about mitochondrial function, which is the powerhouse of your cells. How well is your mitochondria able to produce energy? I might look at blood sugar stability. If your blood sugar isn't regulated, then you're not able to fully utilize and use the sugar that you're eating through carbohydrates and sugars to produce energy. It could also relate to thyroid dysfunction. Your thyroid is so important for your metabolic health. And if your thyroid is not working optimally, then that can affect energy production. And just generally your metabolic health when it comes to generating energy from fats and carbohydrates and even proteins is absolutely vital. And it's something that I look at in the metabolomics test that I run, which is an organic acids test. And it will look at how well you're producing energy at a functional level and looking at different elements like mitochondrial health, oxidative stress, methylation, toxic exposure, all these things that could potentially be affecting your cells. So again, it gives me a few more ideas about what might be underlying here. And I've had this many times when I've been working with clients. We've found a few issues in the gut, but it didn't seem like enough to be causing the hair loss. And then we've run a metabolomics panel and we've found some markers there that are out of range that might relate to toxicity or mold or systemic candida or even issues with protein synthesis. And that is such valuable information. And then we might do further testing around mold toxins or chemicals, and I've discovered lots of things just through doing that one test, that metabolomics test. So it's been extremely helpful looking at this particular area. And this is why you can be doing everything right, but if your body is still in a depleted state, progress is going to feel low. Then we have the nervous system, and this is one of the biggest pieces and often the most overlooked. Hair growth is not a priority for the body when it feels under threat. And if your nervous system is constantly in a stress response, even subtly, then the body is focused on survival, not growth. And this links very closely to hormones because when we're under chronic stress, we see elevated cortisol patterns. I find that people's thyroid signaling is not working effectively. They might be producing enough thyroid hormone. Their TSH might be in range, but their T3, that active thyroid hormone, is low. And that can actually be affected by elevated cortisol as well. and there can be changes in sex hormones, and this all feeds back into the hair follicle. I really love using the Dutch test when we're looking at nervous system. It will look at cortisol patterns, it will look at sex hormones, and it's just giving us a bit more of a picture about what's going on, especially if this is a factor for my clients. So when I talk about nervous system regulation, I honestly don't mean anything extreme. And that's the whole point when it comes to your nervous system. It's about doing less, but doing more of the things that really help to calm your system. So getting outside in the morning, going for a walk, especially going for a walk in nature or around something green and natural, breathing properly rather than shallow breathing, even giving yourself a couple of moments throughout the day to breathe, like fully breathe. I know we're breathing all day long, but actually properly breathe, deep breathe, and just give yourself those moments of calm. And having a bit more of a calmer evening routine as well, whatever that looks like for you. I know if you have children, then the mornings can be pretty hectic. But do you have, say, 30 minutes on a night to just have a really lovely calming routine? And once you do that consistently, it can make such a difference. And this is when it tells your body that it's safe to repair, and hair growth sits within that. And lastly, nutrients that are not available or properly utilised can affect hair growth. And this is essential, but it's often quite misunderstood because, yes, I think if you are experiencing hair loss, you might have already researched the certain nutrients that you need, like protein, iron, zinc, B vitamins. But it's not just about the intake. It's about how well you're digesting it, how well you're absorbing it, how well you're able to transport those nutrients, and actually how you use that at a functional level, so the utilization of those nutrients. And that again is where the metabolomics can be helpful because it tells you at a functional level what nutrient need you have. So for example, you might be eating enough protein, but if your digestion is compromised, then you might not be breaking it down properly. That's going to become an issue because you're not going to have enough protein or enough of the essential amino acids. But when protein isn't broken down properly, some of these peptides look strange to the immune system because they're not fully broken down. And that can also trigger an inflammatory response. Or iron might be present in your diet, but if you have inflammation or if you have gut issues, that can affect absorption of iron. And then with B vitamins, they might be low because of stress, methylation issues, or just an increased demand in your life. So again, we have to zoom out and realize it's not just about taking a supplement, it's how well is your body actually able to use what you're giving it. And supplements are expensive. We need to make sure that we are getting the most value out of the supplements that we are using. So when we look at this all together, what we start to see is this, that the transition from vellus to terminal hair is not just about stimulating the follicle, it's about creating an environment where the follicle can fully function. And that environment is influenced by the immune system, inflammatory pathways, how much energy you're producing, your nervous system, your hormones, and your nutrient status. So if even one of these is slightly off, it can slow things down. And this is why hair growth, particularly in alopecia, is rarely about one thing. It's about understanding what's getting in the way and gently removing those barriers so the body can move forward. Now let's talk about treatments, because there are a lot of them, and you've got things like minoxidil and finasteride, and these potentially can help. Obviously speak to your doctor about them, and they're especially useful in hormone related hair loss like androgenic hair loss, like male pattern hair loss, female pattern hair loss. They're targeting a very specific pathway. They're not fixing everything. And you've got things like PRP, platelet-rich plasma, which you can use. There's even stem cell therapies, growth factor treatments. And these are interesting because they're trying to improve the environment around the follicle. But again, if the system underneath it isn't stable, then the results can be limited. And that's for you to discuss with your dermatologist or your doctor what the best approach is for you. We then have red light therapy, and this is another tool that I get asked about quite a lot. On the surface, it can sound a little bit vague, like you're just shining light on your scalp and hoping for the best. But when you look at the research, there's actually something quite specific going on. And there was a study done, and it was looking at the effects of 650 nanometer red light on human hair follicles. And what they found is that it can support hair growth by influencing gene expression and cellular energy. So it's not just working on the surface, it's actually working at the cellular level. Now, the wavelength part is important because not all light behaves in the same way. We need to bring in a bit of physics here because different wavelengths penetrate to different depths and interact with tissues in different ways. The 650 nanometer range sits within what we call the red light spectrum, and this is a range that can penetrate the scalp deeply enough to reach the hair follicle, but not so deeply that it disperses and loses its effect, so it's quite targeted. But most importantly, this wavelength is absorbed by a part of the cell called the mitochondria, as we spoke about earlier. And the mitochondria is an organelle, well, most of your cells other than your red blood cells, and it produces energy in a form of ATP, which is really important. So if you are experiencing hair loss because of energy, then this again is really important. And most of the time, even if it is one of the other factors, ensuring that your body has optimal energy just can help every other part of this process. So when red light hits the mitochondria, it helps to improve how efficiently those cells produce energy. And that matters because, as we discussed earlier, hair growth is not just about producing cells. It's about coordinated activity within the follicle. It's that pulling mechanism we talked about, that cellular movement and the communication between cells, and that all requires energy. So if the follicle is in a low energy state, which is what I see a lot with clients who are stressed, run down, or just dealing with inflammation, then that process is going to be impaired. And this is where red light therapy can really help, not by forcing growth, but by supporting the conditions that allow the follicle to function more effectively. And this is important. This is not a standalone solution. If the body is still dealing with that ongoing immune activity, if you have nutrient deficiencies or hormonal imbalances, or your nervous system is dysregulated, then red light therapy is only going to take you so far. So I tend to use it as a supportive layer with my clients, something that enhances what we're already doing. And in terms of devices, the key thing is making sure they actually use the correct wavelengths around that 630 to 660 nanometer range, because that's what's been studied. And I will put a link to a couple of the red light therapies that I like in the show notes if you want to find out more about that. But overall, when it comes back to this, red light therapy doesn't make your hair grow. It just is going to support the energy and signaling pathways that hair growth depends on. And when that's in place, alongside everything else we've been talking about, that's when you start to see better, more consistent progress. There's also things that you might see like scalp massage and certain ways that you can improve your diet, especially if you've got nutrient deficiencies. There are oils you can put on your scalp, and just changing your hair care so it's not so toxic, and they all have a place, but they don't work on their own. And when you were thinking about hair growth itself and the topical treatments, as much as there is some science behind them, the truth is it's all about an inside out approach when it comes to any aspect of our health, including hair and our skin health. So let's go back to the question we asked at the beginning of the episode. Can you speed up hair growth? The truth is not really, not in the way that you might want. You can't override biology, unfortunately. You can't force the follicle to move faster than it's ready to. But what you can do is remove what's blocking it, support what's needed, and allow the process to happen properly. So it's less about speeding it up and it's more about not slowing it down. If you take one thing from this, let it be this: hair growth is not something you force, it's something you support. And when you understand what your body is responding to, especially with alopecia, that's when things start to shift. And when I was experiencing hair loss, I would feel so gutted when I would find another patch. It was just like I had to go through the whole thing again. But what put me at ease was I just went back to what I knew. Like, there were certain foods that I ate. I focused more on not doing too much. I would put on topical treatments, and I just went through that process, and that put me at ease. And to be honest, it was when I was focused more on my chronic fatigue than the hair loss that things really started to move forward. And I just think that letting go and having peace with the hair issues and the skin issues, because I just had more to worry about at the time. And I think when people hear chronic fatigue, it just sounds like such a vague thing to be talking about when we're talking about hair loss and skin issues, which again can be awful, but I'd lived with it for such a long period of time. And the chronic fatigue was just something I couldn't deal with. It just affected every aspect of my life, and focusing on that rather than the hair growth actually made a big difference. I was still being proactive, but I wasn't feeling so frustrated at the hair loss at that point because I just wanted to feel better. So if this is something you're going through or want to understand what's actually driving it for you, I'd start with getting a bit more clarity on your own picture rather than just trying more and more things. I put together a free guide on optimizing hair growth, which walks you through some key systems that we've talked about today and how to start supporting hair growth in a practical way. You can download that via the link in the show notes. And if you want to go deeper and look into this in a more personalized way, you can also explore testing or reach out to work together. And I will put the link to my application form in the show notes as well if you are interested in working together one-to-one. Because once you understand the why behind what's happening in your body, everything else becomes a lot more clear. If you would like to ask any questions about today's episode, feel free to pop over to my Instagram account, which is at the Autoimmunity Nutritionist. You can also join my free group, the Autoimmune Forum. I'm sharing lots of ideas and prompts this month about resetting for spring. If you'd like to join us, feel free to go to www.theautoimmuneforum.com and you'll find the link to join there. If not, have a fantastic rest of your week and I'll speak to you soon. Take care. Thank you very much for joining me today on the Autoimmune Reset. I really hope you enjoyed the discussion and be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. And if you liked it, I would hugely appreciate a review on iTunes as it helps me understand what you like about the podcast and to help share the information with more people. I'm excited to speak to you next time. And remember, you have the power to take the reins on your health. So keep the faith and celebrate the small wins. Until next time.